Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar in our How To series for Patronum. Hopefully, everybody's managed to get online on LinkedIn. The idea of these sessions is that we're picking individual features or benefits of Patronum and just doing a session specifically on that. So breaking them down into bite-sized pieces so that over time you'll be able to get more and more value out of Patronum. So whether you're an existing customer already using it, you might learn a few more tips and tricks. If you're potentially thinking about investing in Patronum, hopefully these will show you all the benefits that you'll get. Now, this session is specifically around creating offboarding policies to automate the process of tidying up a user when they leave your organization, making sure you've handled all of their data correctly, making sure you've secured their account, finally deleting it when the time comes, and all those kind of things. Now, why is it important? Well, any business is going to have some kind of an offboarding or process for dealing with leavers. You want to deploy that process in a consistent way. So every single time you do it, you're taking the same steps. The only way to do that really consistently is to automate it. The other benefit, of course, is it makes sure you're doing those same steps every time, but also that you're not making any errors in those steps. Because when a process is manual, there's more chance of introducing errors into it. So we do one manual process, we create the policy one time, get it all checked out, and then after that, everything happens in an automated way. And these days, there are so many things you have to take into account when you want to secure a leaving process. Right from things like dealing with all the two-factor authentication steps that people have to go through these days. What do you do with somebody's data? Is it important to keep hold of that data when somebody's leaving? Do you want to transfer it to somebody else? What about their devices and so on? So we'll go through and we'll talk about how you create a policy to tackle each of these things. So what I'm going to do is just move myself out of the way a little bit here and show you that we've got Patronum on screen here. Now this is a demo account that we use for these kind of things, so it's full of quite a lot of spurious data and so on, but not to worry, you'll get the feel for exactly what we have to do here. So if you see some unusual usernames and whatnot, don't worry too much about that. So first thing we're going to do naturally is we're going to jump into the policies area. And we're going to go right ahead and create a new policy. So we use the blue floating action button on the right-hand side. Now, the key thing here is when we point to that button, it pops. When we create a policy, we can give it a name, or we can create a policy. We can create another folder to keep our policies in, keep them organized. I'm just going to go right ahead and create a policy here, and I'm going to call this, let's say, leavers policy for want of a better name. This is all going to be around dealing with user information, removing the user, renaming them, whatever we want to do. So the trigger for this is naturally going to be something based on user directory, not something to do with your Google Drive. So we'll select directory as the trigger and save that. And this will take us into the policy screen where we've got all these various tabs across here that we're going to touch on, and we'll set up our policy and the steps that we want to take in there. First thing we want to do, though, is identify which cohort of users this policy impacts. Now, the reason for this is, or what this allows you to do, is create different policies, different offboarding policies for different types of user or different groups of users. It may be that for your senior executive team, you want to have a particular policy that preserves all of their data. Maybe for more junior folks, maybe people in an environment where perhaps they're not working on data that's that important to the business, you don't need to do that, and you can have a much more rapid offboarding process for them. So we can create different policies for different cohorts, and those cohorts can be defined either by the part of the organization they sit in your directory, that's the organizational unit, or the OU as it's called, or by the group that you've put them in, or any combination of those things really here. So to make sure we don't cause any havoc here, I'm going to narrow this down to just my test organizational unit here. So I clicked on include the org unit. I'm just going to select that test org. Okay, I can add more organizational units if I want, and I can add groups. So I can start with a wide set and narrow it down by excluding groups, or I can start with a low group and just add groups or add OUs to increase. So this is going to be common. We've seen this before in the previous how-to video we did, so we'll reiterate this a few times, but this is how you build the scope of your policy. Once we've done that, we can then add additional conditional information here. Now, a condition is what is it about this user that is going to cause this policy to trigger? Now, we can pull out pretty much everything that we've got in a user's profile here to use as a trigger. So it might be tempting to do something like pick suspended as a one of the parameters, and you say, okay, if a user is suspended, then let's trigger this offboarding policy. I would caution against doing that for a couple of reasons. One, when you suspend a user in the Google Admin Console, you immediately stop email from coming into that user account, so you'll get bounce back messages. It also prevents some other actions from taking place. So things that we might want to do here in our policy using the APIs may not be possible if a user is in a suspended state. So our preferred option often is to just put some kind of other flag onto a user's profile to indicate that they are going to be offboarded, they're going to be leaving the organization. And we actually include in when you install Patronum, you'll see these additional attributes here called start date and end date. And if you can fill that in either from a HR system taking an automated feed if you want to do it that way, or you can go into a user's profile in Patronum and just manually enter those bits of information. This is ideal if you've got folks like maybe interns or seasonal workers, and you know that they're going to be working with you for a particular period of time. You know what their start date is, you know what their end date is going to be. You could set that up right from the word go, and then it'll make sure that when the end date approaches, whatever policy you put in place to kind of start shutting that account down will trigger automatically. So that's one way of doing it. And you can also then, if you put an end date, you can then say, I want to trigger this policy N number of days, sort of before or after that policy. So I'm going to say here, let's do this maybe 3 days after somebody's particular end date. Okay. Now, I'm probably not going to have any users in here because we haven't set an end date for that. But what I could do is I could click this preview button, and it would show me any of the users that were sort of included in that that were due to leave sort of within 3 days of today. Okay. The next step, the actions. There's a few things that make life really useful here for when we're offboarding users. First thing is we could require an approval for this policy before it actually triggers. So that could be a sort of a safety mechanism. You don't necessarily want to trigger your offboarding policy and start deleting users and removing their data and so on just because an end date has reached. Maybe you want to get approval from the manager. So you could do that. You can say, let's get approval from a particular user, and you can type in a particular email address here, or you could use the variable for manager, and it'll pick up the manager from the directory. We also say, what happens if the manager doesn't respond after a particular period of time? Well, we can just continue on regardless. Maybe you might not want to do that. We could just abandon this task in the policy and forget all about it, or we could reassign it to somebody else to get their approval. Okay. So nice safety mechanism there. What else could we do? We could put a delay on this policy. Well, why might you want to do that? Well, it's possible that your offboarding process happens in different stages. This is very common. The first thing that might happen is as soon as you hear from the person's manager or from the people team or whatever it might be that somebody's leaving, you might put into place a policy that starts shutting down their account or moving their data to their manager, or various things like that to start tidying up. But you don't go ahead and actually delete the account for some time, maybe 30 days later. It's quite a common thing to do. So you put the account in a suspended state, And then we could have another policy that says when that account has been suspended, delay for 30 days before actually going ahead and deleting it. And that gives you that kind of window to recover things if that turns out to be necessary. It's also quite common for organizations to have a process, and they only run that process on a periodic basis. So they do a tidy up of their user directory every 90 days or something like that. So having a delay in there allows you to do that. Now, there's a special option here called executor. What do we mean by that? Well, it kind of comes from the term when somebody dies and you get an executor of their will. It's the person that deals with all of the aftermath and decides what to happen. We use the term here to mean who gets the various assets from this person when they leave. And those assets can be things like Google Drive files, calendars, contacts, and so on. So it's just like the information transfer that you'll see inside of the Google Admin Console, where you can transfer files from one person to another, and it's a useful thing to do just before they leave. Excuse me. So you'll see as we go through the policy and build the various steps, you can assign a different executor at each step. But here what we're doing is allowing you to do that right up front. I'm going to skip this for a moment and we can come back to it. We can set a notification here, which will send a notification to a particular user that this policy is executing. And this notification uses an email template that you can define in the settings area here. So I'm not going to go into detail about creating an email template. Maybe that's for another session. But just be aware that you can put in the email address here, and it could be the user themselves that you notify. It could be their manager. It could be the people team, whatever you need to do, and it'll send an email template saying this policy is about to trigger. We can also create a report that will be a full report of everything that this policy has done. That's typically something that you would send to the administrators and say, okay, we've completed this policy and it's done all of these actions. And finally, in this list, we can schedule this policy to run particular times. Quite often you will have a policy created in Patronum and it's continuously running, or in the background it's actually running on a schedule. We talked last time about creating email signatures, and the policy you would create for signature is just going to run in the background on a periodic basis, and if somebody were to deviate from the standard email signature, the policy will run again and it'll put it back to your standard. Well, here, when you're doing an offboarding, you might want it to only happen on certain days of the week. Maybe Thursday is your day for doing all of your offboarding activity for everybody that was leaving in the previous 7 days. So you could choose here, let's pick today's date, and we can say, let's do this every week on a Thursday, or we do it every month on the 25th, or sometimes policies are only run annually or whatnot. So you can define your schedule here, and this will determine how often or how frequently this policy runs. Okie doke. So what do we actually want this policy to do? Well, let's move across first of all to the profile section. Yeah, just get rid of that. We didn't need that. And we'll move across to the profile section. And what I want to do, because this is an offboarding policy, if I move over to the floating action button here, when I hover over it, we get a little minus one up here. So if I move away and come here, we get a minus. This is an offboarding or a deprovisioning policy we're creating here. So this is the option I'm going to create. And we'll go through each of these tabs and we'll talk about the settings that you can apply when you're starting to remove a user. So I'll click on deprovision. This is for profile information. So this is the information that's inside the directory. Options we've got here is remove the standard directory information from the user. So this is kind of stripping out the information that this user has in the directory. Removing their profile photo. Whether or not this is important, I think if you know that you're going to be finally deleting this user profile, within the next 30 days or something anyway, maybe it's not necessary. But if you're going to have this profile still appearing in your directory, maybe it's important that their photo is removed for whatever reason. If you've got custom attributes that you've created for this user, then you can start stripping those out at this point. And quite a useful one is if they've got email aliases assigned to them, start stripping those away. You might want to be using those email aliases elsewhere, so removing them from this user is handy. I'll show you another neat trick when we get into the settings tab as well, which is useful. Okay, we move across into the groups tab and go to deprovision. It may be that this user is an owner of a group or many groups. You don't necessarily want that ownership to just kind of disappear, so you have orphaned groups. So you can choose to transfer the ownership of the group. And here's the first time we see this term executor again. So if I say I want to transfer the group ownership to the executor, because I didn't actually go ahead at the beginning in the workflow tab and define who the executors were for each step, I'm able to do it here in the bottom. So typically, I would suggest it's going to be the manager of this individual that becomes the executor, and the manager then becomes the owner of the group. And we can also remove this user from any groups that they're a member of. Now, this is important if those groups are being used to grant access to things, like it could be granting access to calendars or chat groups, like chat spaces, or a mail group, could be an email group, or files and folders. So removing this user from those groups starts to take things away and make sure that they no longer have access to them. It's also kind of important if you'll see later on we are able to do a nice tidy up on the calendar. In fact, it's the next tab along. But if you've ever been in that situation where a calendar event is sent to a whole bunch of people through a group, and then somebody makes a change to it and it sends out a new update, but in the meantime, some people have left the organization, they're no longer in that group, then you're going to start getting bounce back emails. And the whole thing turns into a bit of a mess. So by removing people from the group as they leave, you avoid all of that. So I'm going to do all of those things. Excuse me, a quick drink. Okay, moving on to calendars. Again, action button, going to go to the minus. By the way, the settings button here for calendars is more to do with when you're creating users or provisioning users, and you can define a few settings in the calendar, define which time zone it's in and so on, for example. But I'm going to come back here to the deprovision option. Okay, now then, first one, removing the user as an attendee of events. Again, this is useful so that you don't get all of these sort of bounce back messages. If you've got somebody listed in, maybe it's a recurring appointment, it happens every week. This person is an attendee of those appointments, and now you've deleted the user or you've suspended the user, and somebody makes a change to that recurring schedule. It's going to send out a message to everybody that's an attendee, and you're going to start getting bounce back messages unless you remove them. So we reach out to all of the different events that this person is an attendee of, and we'll remove them. We could decide that we're going to decline those events instead of just removing them. So removing them is a kind of a silent approach, whereas declining those events sends the normal, I'm not going to be able to make this this event thing. That might be a more useful option if people are having kind of one-to-one meetings, or it acts as a notification to whoever's organized the meeting that this person isn't going to be able to make it because they no longer work here. So that I will go with that option. We can do the same thing for external events as well, so not just within your own domain. If this user has their own calendar, which they all do, but they've been using it for important things. Maybe they run a team calendar or something out of their own within their own calendar, and all those events are shared with team members. Well, maybe you want to transfer all of those primary calendar events with the executor again. And once again, down at the bottom, I can determine who that executor is going to be. Or maybe I just want to delete all the events instead. So instead of transferring, I'm going to delete those events, and we just want to wipe out this person's calendar completely. Or maybe it's important for me to preserve their old historical events from the past, in which case I only want to delete the future events going forward, which again, it's tidying up. They're not going to appear in those, they're not going to show up for those meetings, so you may as well delete the future ones. So the decisions you're making here are really around how much of that information you need to preserve. And just as you can transfer the primary calendar to an executor, you can do the same thing for any secondary calendars that this person may have created. So I'm sure you're all aware, you can create additional calendars in your Google Calendar app, and quite often they're used for training calendars or personal things in a separate calendar or those kind of things. So again, you could optionally choose to transfer those to the executor. And if this person is a member or has been granted access to another calendar, the sharing and the delegation, you can remove them from all of that as well. So I'm going to leave that one turned on. Okay. So that's setting up the calendar thing, and you can see it's kind of creating a little summary underneath as I'm doing this. Contacts, some clever things that we can do in here. We'll go back to the minus button again. Okay, contact sharing. We haven't really covered this in a how-to yet. It'll be a future how-to video, but hopefully you're aware in Google Workspace you can share contacts or labels within contacts to other users. Patronum makes that particularly easy. It's something that an administrator can do on behalf of other users through the Patronum interface. It's also something that you can do through policy, and it's something that's quite often included in an onboarding policy. So if a member of a team keeps particularly important contacts in their contacts app, maybe it's a list of all suppliers or something like that, then that label can be shared with all the people in the team through a policy. That's important. Then if that person is the one who's leaving, you don't want to lose access to all of those contacts. So we can do here the same as with the calendar, transfer all of those contacts to the executor. I'm going to once again define who that executor should be. And it can be any particular user, but it's more often going to be the manager. Transfer this contact to the executor so that they appear in the executor's list, or delegate rather than just transferring. Delegate is only going to work if this account stays active, because once an account is dead and all of the content in it is deleted, there's nothing left to delegate. So that's just something to be aware of there. And then this last one, I think, is probably the most powerful feature in this deprovisioning of contacts. This says, remove the ex-employee from other users' My Contacts. Okay, need to explain this, so pay attention. If a user is in your organization, they naturally appear in the Google directory. And if somebody's on their laptop, their computer, and they're in Google Mail, you can start typing an email address and they'll appear in the autocomplete. So you can just start typing SW and my name would appear in the autocomplete if you're in my organization. What about if you're using a mobile phone and you get an incoming call? If the person's phone number and their contact details are stored on your phone in your own My Contacts app, then it'll pop up with their name and details on the incoming call. Let's say you're receiving a call from Stuart. But if it isn't, if the only way you know about that person is through the Google directory, the company-wide Google directory, that won't happen. You'll get an incoming call, you'll see the phone number, but it won't be able to do the lookup in the directory instantly to find that person's name details. Typically, to make that happen, you want to put this person's contacts into your My Contacts. That's your own contacts app, contacts.google.com, or the contacts app on your phone. As part of our onboarding policy, we can make that happen. We can push out contacts to people's My Contacts and make sure that those contacts are all available on people's individual apps, so that you do get that nice caller ID feature on your phone. That's great, but what happens when that person leaves the organization? Now everybody has got a copy of their contact details sitting on their own phones and in their own contacts apps. We want to tidy that up, and that's what this last option is here. So when you tick this and we run this policy, Patronum will reach out to all of these, all of the users in your organization, or rather all the users that are within the, actually no, it will, I was going to say within scope, but actually it'll reach out to all the users in the organization and find the contact details of the person that's leaving and remove them. So you don't get left with lots and lots of stale information from people who've moved on and left the organization still sitting in your own contacts. So I think that's a fantastic feature. Takes a little bit of explaining, but hopefully everybody's got their heads around that. Okay. The files. Over time, people create lots and lots of files, folders, shared drives, what have you. They share them out with people. And you may have had this situation when you delete a user account and all of their files get deleted. The people who they were shared with now lose access to all of that information. So we need a process that's going to deal with all of that. So we provide a few options here. We can just go ahead and say, just transfer all of this person's information from to their manager or something like that. So we can choose different types of information, either files and folders and things like that that you would have stored in Google Drive, or Looker Studio. Now, Looker Studio is the kind of data visualization application, if you've not come across it, and it just stores its data in a slightly different way. So we have to provide a separate option for that. More often, you're going to be talking about Google Drive data. And what we do here is we say, where's it going to come from? It's the user's My Drive. Who's it going to go to? The executor again, once again. So we're going to choose the manager. And what we're going to do here is put in a path. So these are like the folder name that you want to drop this data into. And we can use the variables that we have in the user directory here. So I'm going to say, let's put it in. I'm going to use F name, and then L name is the L name for last name. And I'm just putting dash files for argument's sake. So what's going to happen there is when we transfer the files from the person that's leaving to the manager, it's going to create a folder called first name, last name for the user that's leaving. So, Joe blogs, let's say, dash files, and then it's going to transfer all the files into that folder. So that means that the manager, when they look in their My Drive, they'll see a new folder called Joe blogs files, and they'll be able to see, all right, there's all the files from that person who's left. What we can also do is set, or rather decide whether we want to do that transfer for absolutely every file that's sitting in this person's My Drive, or only the files that they've shared with other people, or only unshared files. Now, I would say it's more typical that you're going to say, I want to transfer absolutely everything, or you're going to say, only transfer the files that have been shared with other people. Because that means anything that's not been shared is probably either it's not work product because it's not been complete, or whatever, because it hasn't been shared with anybody else, or maybe it's personal files that perhaps shouldn't be transferred over to the manager. So it's really important that anything that is shared is transferred, because that ensures that the people who've got access to it continue to have access to it. What we can do, we can provide an opt-out for users. So you can say, let's exclude any files that are in a particular path. And I'll say, let's create use a folder name called private for argument's sake. And what that is telling them is anybody in your organization can be notified that when you leave, all your data is going to be transferred to your manager unless you put files into a folder called private. Okay. And then those things will not be transferred. Okay, so that's the transferring of the file data. This next one is really quite useful. Requesting access changes to external files. Sharing happens both ways. So although you might have shared, this user might have shared stuff to other people, they will be the recipient of shared files and folders as well, some of which may have come from outside, from external parties, suppliers, customers, partners, whatever it might be. If this person who's leaving is the only person that content has been shared with, and they leave and you delete their account, then as an organization, you lose access to that, what might be really important information. So what we can do here by ticking this box, we can send a request out to those external parties saying, basically, this person is leaving the organization. Can you please reshare your content with the new person, that new person being the executor? And let's choose the manager again as the executor. Now, we can't force them to do that. There's no way of compelling them to do that. It's entirely up to the external party whether they go ahead or not. But if you've got that kind of a relationship to them where it is important information that's being shared and everybody recognizes that, then hopefully they will do the decent thing and share that information now with the executive, the manager. So again, this is kind of one of those almost life-saving kind of features that we go beyond the scope of just managing the data within your environment, and we reach out to your partners and suppliers and whatnot and say, can you please help us out as well? We can go ahead here and say remove any access that this person has to externally shared files, or remove access to any internally shared files, and also remove access to shared drives. Okay, so whether that's through they're named as a member or an owner or whatever to the shared drives, then they will be removed by ticking that. So I'm going to add all of those in there. Hopefully everybody's keeping up, and you can see how we're building up a pretty comprehensive and pretty detailed policy here that's really going to tidy up everything when this user leaves. Okay. The next option is for the email signature. Now, hopefully, if you saw the previous how-to video, you will have seen how we create email signatures. I'm going to suggest there's probably little value in changing a signature as somebody's leaving, unless you want to put something in place in the weeks before they actually leave. You may want to add something into the email signature that says, by the way, please be aware that I'm leaving the organization at the end of the month. My replacement will be so-and-so and so-and-so. Here's their contact details, or something like that as a bit of an awareness thing that gets sent out with each email. But I'm going to skip over signatures for the time being. I'm going to come back to settings because I think that's the most important thing, and it kind of finishes off the story. So I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to go straight to licenses, and you'll see here how we can turn on and off different licenses. So as part of your deprovisioning process, it might be that you want to change the license from a full-blown Google Workspace license to maybe a Vault license for this user, or maybe just a Cloud Identity license for this user that will preserve the account for a while, but it doesn't allow them to do anything. And then if your cycle is in 90 days, we finally go ahead and start deleting everything. Well, maybe it makes sense to just transfer that account onto a Cloud Identity license for those intervening until the 90 days has elapsed, and then you finally go ahead and delete it all. So you can turn on and off the different licenses that you need here. The roles tab is really any administration roles that this person might have, and it's not just administration roles within Google Admin itself, but also within Patronum here. So if you have delegated any kind of control of Patronum and managing users and things like that through the interface here, then ticking this option removes all administration roles that this person might have. The backup option, we partner with a backup utility called afi.ai, and in AFI you can define different service level agreements, different types of backups, different backup schedules, if you like. And a backup SLA determines exactly what data gets backed up: Drive, Calendar, etc., Mail. It also determines how frequently that data gets backed up, and it also determines how many copies or how many sort of grandfathered copies are retained. Those SLAs are given a name, and then in here you can assign an SLA. And we've gone with the gold, silver, bronze kind of nomenclature here, and you can define a backup policy that gets implemented on this user. Now, what we could do here in an offboarding policy is you could say turn on the backup now, and that would ensure that all of the data that this user has got that is within the scope of that policy gets backed up immediately before the user account actually finally gets deleted. So a nice way of preserving all of that content if you needed to. Now, AP is a separately licensed product, but as you can see, it's tightly integrated into Patronum here. The last one here, spaces, is your chat spaces. So just like deprovisioning anything else, we can transfer any spaces that this person is a manager of to the executor, and we can remove this user from any spaces that they are a member of. Okay, just to make sure that they don't just hang around as appearing to still have access to those chat spaces and confusing everybody that's using them. Okay, I skipped over settings here. So the settings tab typically includes settings that you would find in Gmail. So things like your out of office response, your vacation responder, creating labels and aliases and those kind of things. Now you could make changes to some of these in here. Probably the one that might make sense is to set up a vacation response. Again, if your cycle is we don't actually delete this user until 90 days has expired, then maybe you want to set a vacation response that just says, hey, please be aware I've left the organization. And so for the intervening time, that email response will get sent out. Most of the others, I would say there's not much point in changing them, but the section called security is really important. So I'm going to open this section up, and in here, you'll see that we can do a whole bunch of things to finally kind of close off this account and secure it, and then ultimately delete it. So let's go through each of these. We can delete any two-step verification backup codes that this user may have. So one thing that can catch some people out sometimes is that they say, well, this person's going to be, or this person's left the organization. So to prevent them getting access, we're just going to change their password or something like that. But there's usually other ways that users can get back into their account, particularly things like the recovery details, which we'll come to in a minute. It may be that they've downloaded and stored separately their whole list of the kind of the 10 two-step verification, the backup codes. Well, you want to make sure that those backup codes are invalidated once this user is leaving. So let's go ahead and delete all of those backup codes. Application-specific passwords. This is something that's gradually being diminished. Google are trying to do away with this as a technique, but there are still some older, let's call them legacy applications that require simple password access to integrate with your Google account. So you will sometimes find that users have created an application-specific password just so they can use that one legacy application. And that's potentially a backdoor back into their account. So the main password and everything else has been shut down and locked down, but there's still this one specific password sitting there in the background that we've forgotten about. So let's make sure that gets deleted. We can go ahead and change the password here, and we can choose to email the password, email the new changed password out to somebody else using one of our email templates, if we like. So I'm just going to say none. I don't want to actually email the details out to anyone. I'm just creating a kind of a random password that nobody knows about. Yeah, if an account's been created with recovery information, and quite often that recovery email address or recovery phone number might be the personal phone number and personal email address of a user. In fact, that's something we do recommend when you create an account, use the recovery email address of their personal account, so you can start sending them information before the new user starts, whether it's joining instructions or policies that you might want them to read, or so on. So you might find that the recovery details are their personal addresses, so you don't want that lingering around either. So we'll turn those two off. Any connected applications, so this is again applications that people might be using as a front end to their email, or where you've created like an OAuth, if that is familiar to anyone, a kind of an API connection between your account and some other application, then we can turn all of that off here. Let's go ahead and sign out the user. Seems obvious, but not always something that gets remembered. And what that will do is it'll basically expire the session cookie for all sessions. So a user might be logged in on their phone, on a laptop, on a desktop somewhere as well. You can be logged into your account in multiple locations, and each of those will have an ongoing session. So by signing out the user, we expire that session, and it means that they are actually out. We can optionally here decide that we want to hide this user from the main Google directory. So again, just so they don't show up in any kind of autocomplete cycle. So let's hide the user from the directory, and that makes sure if somebody's starting to type ST, maybe they're trying to send an email to Steve or something, and they type ST, and my name pops up, Stuart pops up. Well, I shouldn't be popping up because I've left the organization. So or I'm about to leave the organization. So let's hide it from the directory. Okay. Now, we've got the option here to move this user to a different organizational unit. Why might we want to do that? Well, a couple of reasons. First reason might be that you've got a separate organizational unit for leavers where various applications are disabled. Maybe you're disabling Google Drive in there, and you're disabling Google Groups or something, various things that you don't want people to have access to during a period of time when they're about to leave. So you could move them into that org. It's also particularly useful if you're creating your offboarding process using a number of different policy stages. So I've talked a few times here about how organizations will often do a first stage, and then 30 days later they'll do the next stage, and then after 90 days they'll do the final stage. So it might be we start transferring all of the data, but we suspend the account, and then we archive the user, and then finally 90 days later we go ahead and delete the user. Well, we can use the organizational unit that they're sitting in as a trigger for the next stage. So what I could do here is I would say, yes, so, as part of this policy, I want to move this user into a different organizational unit. So I'll go to my mouse wheel is a bit tricky. There we go. In here, I've got my, oh, good heavens. I've got my levers org unit. So when this policy runs, it's going to move the user or the users that are wrapped up in this policy into that levers OU, which will be configured in a different way from my main OU. Okay. Next thing we could do is rename this user. Okay. Now, again, we can use the variables here. So it's pretty common for usernames to take the format of first name dot last name at domain name. So me at bespin.labs.com. What I might want to do is make sure that the email address gets changed so that somebody can't guess the email address and maybe use it for nefarious purposes, knowing that somebody's left. Well, I can now start using their email address and maybe do some kind of identity theft or something along those lines. But also, maybe we want to reuse that email address somewhere else. So what I can do here is I'm going to click on here, and you'll see we get the usual variables that I can choose. So I can say, let's say first name dot, and then I know it's L name, so I'll do L name, close the brackets. But I'm going to go to the beginning of that. I'm going to say X dash. Okay. So we're going to rename this user. Instead of being joe.blogs. They're going to be x-joe.blogs. Okay. What that then allows me to do is to reuse their old email address of joe.blogs and assign it to somebody else. I can either assign it to a user, lo and behold, it's going to be their manager again, or I can assign it to a group. Well, let's talk about assigning it to a user first of all. What this means is then that it creates an email alias for the manager using this user's original email address. So if it's joe.blogs, then the manager gets an alias of joe.blogs, which means that any incoming email for joe.blogs is going to go to the manager. Now that might create mayhem in that manager's mailbox because they're now getting a jumble of mail from not just their own mail, but also this leaver person's mail as well. So what we can do is we can also add a label onto here. So I'll use the variables again and type in emails. So we're saying fname, lname, emails. That's going to create a label in the manager's Gmail mailbox called first name, last name, emails, or Joe blogs emails in this case, let's say. And that means any incoming email is going to be not exactly segregated, but at least it's going to be labeled with that person's label. So you can search easily, you can filter easily on that kind of stuff and manage it. So that's one option, and it ensures that continuity of communication. Because the worst thing is if you are having a communication channel with somebody outside of your organization, maybe it's a potential customer and they're emailing this person, and then all of a sudden they start getting bounce back emails because this person's account has disappeared. Well, much better to redirect that email to somewhere else where it can be picked up and dealt with. So it's assigned to a user. Maybe it's another person. Let's assign it to an actual individual here. So it could be that this person is responsible now for, let's say this policy is just for sales folk. This person is the sales manager responsible just for dealing with those sales messages. So you've directed everything to that person. That's assigning it to a user. We could alternatively say, let's assign it to a group. And I can pick a group here. I think I've got a group called X users. There we go. I have a group called X users. And it's the same kind of process, really. That group would have been set up as a collaborative inbox using Google's terminology. So it acts like a mailbox. And again, I could put labels into there. So let's call it fname, last name, emails again. So that's going to create a label inside of that collaborative inbox group, and then any emails for this lever are going to be redirected into there. And then the benefit of having it into a group is that, of course, means that multiple people could access that email and deal with it. Okay. Next thing, any aliases that have been automatically assigned, we want to remove them. How do aliases get automatically assigned? Well, when you change your name, Google will automatically assign an alias for you. Quite common when people get married and change their surname, then through an administration process, you've been through, maybe it was years ago, you've been through the process of reassigning or changing the name. Well, in the admin console, Google's automatically created an alias of the old name to ensure that you still are able to still able to receive emails. So by ticking this, we're making sure that any aliases that have been created that way are removed. And then the last option here, really, we can ignore reactivate the user, because let's assume that this user is on the way out and we can go ahead and ultimately delete them. But maybe I don't want to delete them immediately. So once all of the actions of this policy have completed, the last thing that would happen is to suspend that user. But I might not want to do it straight away. I might want to buy myself some time. So again, I've got the option to put in, a few days delay. So let's just put in 4 days, excuse me, delay here to make sure we've got time to tidy things up if we've transferred something to the wrong place or whatever, or we need ultimately to reactivate that user, we bought ourselves some time. If you want to run a kind of a rapid process and just go right ahead and delete the user, maybe your policy for junior staff or newcomers, maybe your interns and things like that, if they're not going to be the owners of lots of information, you're not going to need to do anything more advanced with them. You might choose to go right ahead and just turn on the delete option and delete that account straight away. Okay. So we've covered all of the tabs in here. If I save that now, I could save and activate here. I'm just going to save all the options in that tab, and then I could save and activate that policy, and that policy would be in effect straight away, just sitting there waiting for all of the parameters in my scope and so on to be true, and then it would trigger. We can see a summary down here of all the actions here that we've just been through and created. Okay. So that's kind of a pretty rapid run through of how you can create a really detailed and policy that's going to do all the things that you need it to do consistently and without error every time you want to offboard a user. But there's one more thing. We've got delays in this policy. It's doing things over a period of time. We might be asking for approvals, etc., etc. What if you've got that emergency situation where somebody is, maybe they're being marched out the door because they've done something that they really shouldn't have done. They've been summarily fired from the organization. You want to get them off the premises. You want to get their account completely shut down in as quick a time as possible. Well, we take account of that. What you can do is you can create an emergency offboarding policy. Okay, and in the settings for the whole of Patronum here, if we open up the settings here and go into account settings, you'll see there's an option for emergency offboarding, and in there you choose a policy name. The policy has got to be already in existence, and it's got to be an active policy, so it can't be one that's disabled. You select the policy. You can see here I've created and activated a policy called emergency exit, and I've selected that policy. Now that policy may be just a very rapid or condensed, let's just go right ahead and shut everything down and suspend or delete this user straight away. It'll be some mechanism to secure that account in as rapid a time as possible. It might literally just be all the things we saw in the security tab. Change the password, rename the user, blah blah blah, but don't do any of the transfers, because those transfers can take time. And then how would you use that? Well, if we come back to the people tab here and we find somebody that we're needing to offboard quickly, we can click on the overflow menu, the three dots, and you'll see. Let me do that again. Somebody that's a bit higher up, so you might be able to see. You can see there's a menu item here to emergency offboard that user, and that will trigger that policy and just execute all the steps in that policy straight away. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a really clear idea of all the things that we can do in the offboarding cycle. If anybody's got any questions, pop them into the LinkedIn chat there. Hopefully they'll show up for me, and I'll just give you a couple of moments to do that. If there aren't any questions, I will just say that we're really interested in understanding what other topics you'd like covered in these how-to sessions. Hopefully you're aware, Patronum's a very wide-ranging product, does an awful lot to improve and automate and speed up the administration process. But if there are particular things that you are keen to understand more about, just let us know. Reach out to us, chat or email or what have you via our website, and we'll be sure to put a session together. But yeah, if there's nothing else, we'll wrap it up there. Thanks for your attention, and we'll see you on the next one.